welcome to the Peak Day podcast, where we discuss fertility and natural family planning with our friends. Today's guests are Raleigh and Nicole Starbuck. Raleigh and Nicole Starbuck have been married for 14 years and are recent converts to the Catholic faith. Having discovered the fullness of truth, they are passionate about evangelizing their fellow Catholics, especially regarding the Eucharist and the sacrament of marriage. They live in Houston, Texas, with their 2 children and their 2 dogs. Welcome, Raleigh and Nicole, to the Peak Day podcast.
Yes, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting us to do this.
Yes, thank you so much. Such an honor and privilege to be here.
So let's just start at the beginning. Can you tell us how you 2 met?
Ooh. Yes. So Raleigh is 2 years my senior, and we met at the University of Arizona in Tucson. So school was about to start. He was starting his junior year, and I was coming in as a freshman. And I'll let Raleigh tell his perspective of how we met. But I know for me, earlier that day, I had a little thought in my brain. It was something like, girl, you better stay single for a year, or the next guy you date, you're going to marry. And later that day, I met Raleigh. A friend of ours had gone around the dorm where we lived and had asked everyone to play apples to apples. I don't know if you're familiar with that game.
Sure.
The judge puts down an adjective, right? Adjective. And everyone else puts down the nouns that fit that adjective, and we kept picking each other's cards. Mm-hmm. And I made a joke that it was destiny, it was made to be. And then later I made a joke when he told me that his last name is Starbuck. I said, oh, I'm just going to marry you for your last name. And then we ended up dating and getting married.
Yeah, that's how it happened pretty much.
You would agree with that version? Yeah.
Yeah, there's Nicole. When I was a fairly shy young man, and I didn't really have relationships when I was younger in high school or anything, and I was very studious. And so when I went off to college, I took my education very seriously, and I wasn't really looking to start a relationship. But I met Nicole and we became friends, and at first I didn't I wasn't particularly attracted to her at first.
She's very, it was weird.
Very beautiful. Yes, her appearance, but her personality was very forward, and I wasn't used to that.
Sure. Yeah.
But we became friends first, and we had mutual friends because we would always spend time with a group, playing games and eating meals and stuff like that because we lived in the same dormitory. But then after we got to know each other better, we started dating. Yeah. And then, eventually it led to engagement, and then, here we are.
14 years later.
14 years later.
So thinking back to your engagement, were you practicing any faith? Were you offered any kind of preparation for marriage? What was that process like for you two?
Yeah, we both grew up evangelical Christian, Protestant Christian, and so I grew up more non-denominational, like Calvary Chapel type of churches, and Raleigh grew up Baptist here in Houston, and there wasn't a whole lot of marriage prep for us. We met with my high school youth pastor who was going to be conducting the ceremony. We met with him once, and that was the extent of our marriage prep. And I think too, being immersed in the college culture and just being in a more secular set of studies, we fell into premarital relations, and so stepping into that wedding, it wasn't taken as seriously as I think it could have and should have. And one of the reasons why we really appreciate NFP in the Catholic faith is that is brought up more and talked about, and so that's a huge proponent for why we're going to treat that differently with our kids. Our kids are so little now, but that'll definitely be different this time around.
Yeah. As Nicole said, we had it was 1 hour session with the person who was her she said, her youth pastor, who was presiding at our wedding ceremony, and there was not a lot of preparation, and maybe we'll go into this in more detail later, but her parents are divorced, my parents are divorced. We didn't have very good role models either. So when we were getting into it, we did we did have in our mind, like, we don't want to follow the pattern that our parents fell into. And so we
Okay.
did want to take our marriage seriously, but at the same time,
Mm.
we didn't have a whole lot of people talking about it to us. We kind of had
Okay.
to have our own mindset and our own, I suppose, perspective, our own
Hmm.
way of convincing ourselves that that wasn't going to happen, without
Right.
people speaking into us, good role models.
Mm.
Yeah, but when you're
Hmm.
relying on your own wisdom
Right.
and
Yeah.
not the wisdom of God and the Holy Spirit, like
Mhm.
you're bound to
Mm.
make
Yeah.
mistakes. And we made
Sure.
a ton
Yeah.
of mistakes.
Especially as like 20-year-old college students.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have the
Yeah.
maturity to know
Right.
that.
Right. Right. So 14 years have passed. And when was the conversion? How did that start? And were you both on the same journey, or was someone, going through that journey before the other person?
I was the first one really to look into it more. It was
Hmm.
towards the end of last year. We had gone through a very difficult year. 2023 was hard.
Hmm.
We were facing financial difficulties, relationship problems, family
Hmm.
issues, health issues. It was yeah, our annus horribilis, you could say. And so last December, it had come to a very low point in
Hmm.
my
Yeah.
mindset, at least. I was feeling kind of depressed, and um, when I was able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, coming into this year, 2024, I was like, well, you know, being able to overcome all that is due to God. If it had not
Hmm.
been for God, I don't know what would have happened. Like, we could be divorced right now. Like, it was like
Hmm.
that. And so
Yeah.
at the beginning of 2024, I said, I want to really start taking my faith seriously. Like as Nicole said, we were both raised in, at least in a cultural Christian kind of community, at least, going to church on Sundays, and especially like Easter and Christmas and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Um, and I had, when you're, especially for us men, like for me, like, is you're a silly high school age and then going into college, and you're finally independent from your parents and living on your own
Hmm.
and getting to know who you are and what's important to you. um, I was not super strong in my faith, but then this year I
Hmm.
said, like, this, I really want to take it seriously.
Right.
And so with that being said, I wanted to learn, what does it mean to be a Christian? What's the history of Christianity? And that's that's where it gets kind of dangerous if you're a Protestant, because you find out, looking at the apostolic age, and reading the
Uh,
New Testament in a new light, and you know learning about the early Christian writers, the structure of the church. What was it that Christ really intended for his body of
mm,
believers?
mhm,
And
mhm,
there needs to be some organization there. There needs to be some kind of government, because if you don't have that, if you don't have any authority, it turns into chaos. And if you look at
mm,
the history of Christianity since the Protestant Reformation, it's like, it's the continual, further splintering of the body of
mm,
Christ. And
mm.
so I was exposed to new ideas that I had never really thought of before.
Sure.
And that led me to embracing Catholicism as
Mm.
Christ's originally established church and the fullness of truth. I
Wow.
came to that. I consider myself a fairly academically minded person. And so I had done a
Sure.
lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of listening to
Mm.
podcasts and watching videos and hearing from speakers and
Right.
historians and Bible scholars. And so I researched my way into it.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
during that process, the whirlwind process, I was teaching Nicole a lot of things. I was like, darling, did you know that, so and so like said this? And, have you ever read this passage from the Gospels, and like thought about what this really means? Like, I never thought
Yeah.
about it this way. Like, did you know this? And so I was teaching her little by
Right.
little, but I was going through the
Sure.
process myself
Okay.
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, and then from my end, Raleigh touched on it. Much of what we were experiencing last year, we attribute to various forms of spiritual warfare. But as Romans
Mm,
8:28 says, all things work together for the good of those who love Him. And
mhm,
so I can
mhm,
look back and see how all of these choices that we had made and things that we had been doing and all of this seemingly bad stuff still worked out for his glory. And on
Wow.
my end, especially, I know I
Mm-hmm.
had fallen away from any sort of faith and had gotten deep
Mm-hmm.
into some new age practices and different occult things that on
Mm-hmm.
the one hand I regret, but also I can see how God redeemed me from that. And in
Mm.
reconciling our relationship and repairing our finances and quite honestly saving our family, God showed me the error of my ways and also showed me
Oh,
how the Catholic Church was the one true church. And
right.
admittedly, I was a little further behind in the journey because, in addition to giving up all of that and healing from that and repairing our
Yes.
relationship, I
Right.
also didn't want to be a picker and chooser, right? And so when Raleigh said,
Mm.
"Hey, I'm going to convert to Catholicism," and I saw how seriously he was taking it, it inspired me. But I also knew that I couldn't say, "Oh, I'm going to believe in what the church teaches," except for NFP. And so
Right.
I needed to learn that in order to be
Uh,
100% on board. So I'm a little bit further behind in that journey. Raleigh was
okay.
confirmed a
In April.
Divine Mercy Sunday, April of this year. And I'll be
Beautiful.
confirmed in November of this year in Christ the King Sunday.
Okay. So it sounds like maybe NFP was one of the obstacles or challenges for you in particular,
It
Nicole.
was a huge curveball because I had never heard
Yeah.
of that. They never talked about
Sure.
that. And I
Sure.
mean, it's so birth control of all forms, right? The pill or
Yes.
barrier method is very prominent in today's culture, and even within
Yeah.
Protestant churches. And I remember
Mhm.
sitting in the Baptist church we were going to prior to our conversion, and the women would talk about, oh yeah, when we're ready to have more kids, we'll just remove the goalie, which is remove the condom,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
Or get off the pill
or
or
get off the
whatever.
pill or
Yeah.
whatever the case
Sure.
may be. And
Sure.
so in
Mhm.
Raleigh's conversion, he said, hey, this is what the Catholic Church teaches about birth control and family planning. I said, great. I said,
Wow.
so when is that happening? He said, well, sometime this year. I said, awesome. I have a ton of time to figure that out. Then as we got closer to his confirmation, he said, hey, moving up the timeline, when I'm confirmed, we're going to be stopping that. I said, okay. I can deal with that. Let me figure that out. This is, mind you, this is like January, February of this.
Yes. Yes.
And he comes home from mass one day. He started attending daily mass, and
Oh,
he
okay.
comes home and he goes, "Okay, we're stopping effective right now." And I said, "Oh, okay." Like,
Wow.
I don't want to be complicit in something that's sinful, but also like I need to know what I'm doing in order to do this effectively.
Sure.
And so got right on board, and CCL was very helpful in getting me set up with that, and we were able to learn that rather
Wonderful.
quickly, and then start
Yes.
following God's natural plan for that,
Okay.
even before he was officially confirmed. Yeah.
Now, what were the challenges of, doing that, um, of your conversion in such a short period of time? I'm just amazed, especially for you, Raleigh. You took the bull by the horns and you just researched and boom, you were convinced. I mean, that's the impression that I'm getting.
And he read the
That
whole catechism cover to cover twice.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
I guess I
amazing.
should explain. Like, I'm a teacher. I've worked as a university instructor for a large part of my professional career, and so when I find something that's interesting to me, I really research it pretty heavily, and
Right.
I really love old things. I'm a part-time antiques dealer too, and I love history, and
Oh,
so that was
okay.
one of the things that I really liked is like, well,
Hmm.
you know, every other pretty much every other Christian church has, been started by, some man in the past few centuries, but the
Mm,
church that can be traced back 2,000 years to Jesus and his apostles is the Catholic Church.
mm,
And
okay.
so
Yeah.
once I had discovered that, I'm like, okay, well then I want to learn more about it. And so I
Okay.
looked up a
Yeah.
lot of stuff. As Nicole said, I wanted to I reread the New Testament, and then I got a copy of the Catechism and I read it cover to cover, and then went back and like looked up different sections and highlighted and stuff like that. And after doing
Wow.
that, I started reading some of the writings from the Apostolic Age, the Church Fathers.
Hmm. Hmm.
What I really appreciate about the Catholic faith is all the scholasticism and
Mm,
academia that's behind it. I mean, if you look back, I mean,
hmm.
the Catholic Church is responsible for, in a large part, for the university system and science and
Yes.
uh, and
Hospitals. Yeah.
hospitals,
Yeah.
orphanages, all these things of great
Yes.
establishment. And
Right. Yeah.
So like if you read some of the works of like Thomas Aquinas and Saint Augustine, it's like very deep philosophical stuff, and that's like,
Mm.
you know,
And you were just eating that
no
up,
other church
weren't you?
has that. So
And yeah, Nicole, were you just freaking out? Or what I think is beautiful, Raleigh, was that you were bringing Nicole along with you
Yeah,
on that
he
journey.
was running
And that,
so fast, and meanwhile, I was still trying to let go of all my attachments. I was getting pulled out and saved from the new age spirituality. I was letting go of old
mm,
relationships that weren't for my greatest good. I had a whole business centered around those relationships and the practices, the
okay.
whole practices. So
Yes.
I knew I had to let that go. I had to let that go anyway, but especially,
Hmm.
embracing this fullness of truth in the Catholic faith,
Right.
I had to like let go of that and then learn NFP and keep moving forward. And so I think for me, it was trying to reconcile and make peace with a lot of things at the same time, and it was very
Yeah.
overwhelming to a
I
degree.
bet. I bet. Yeah.
But God helped me through that, and then it feels really good to be on the same page. I feel like for the first time in our 14 years, we're actually like in the
Mm.
same library, in the same book, on the same page.
So, can you expand a little bit on how practicing natural family planning in particular benefits your marriage?
I think it's really helped to open up, one, my awareness of my body and what's going on, and also two, the communication between us, because we're every day having conversations. He'll ask me, okay, like, what's your temperature? Where are you at in your cycle? And like, what are your
Mm-hmm.
symptoms? And like, here, I'll
Right.
show him the chart, and like, here's what's going on. So we know, okay, this is a time where we can be intimate together, and this is a time where we would abstain if we're not feeling called, or if it's not a good time for us to have children. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I think in general, it's really it's allowed us to see, like what Raleigh said earlier, God's plan, God's intention for marriage and for marital
Right.
relations. It's
Right.
deepened our communication with each other. It's strengthened our faith because we've gotten to see, and no one ever talked to us about this before, marriage as a vocation, marriage as a
Mm.
calling,
it's a
marriage as a
sacrament.
Mm-hmm.
sacrament. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Marriage as a mirror and a reflection of our relationship to God. So how we connect and respond to each other is a reflection of our connection to God.
How about you, Raleigh? What's your perspective on how it benefits your marriage while
It's,
using?
I mean, Nicole expressed it very well. I mean,
Mm,
for me, as I mentioned before, it was like coming to understand better, you know, the reason why marriage is a sacrament, the intention that God had when He created man and woman, and
mm,
created them with the bodies that they have, and their capacity to create new life. It's like
right.
if you respect that, then you're respecting God, and that
Mm,
makes you feel closer to God. You know,
right.
Jesus says in the Gospels, like, if you love me, then you keep my commands. And so, as Nicole said, it's the marriage is a reflection, right? Because like husband and wife, it's like, well, Jesus is the spouse, right, and the church is his bride, right?
Mm,
And so that is a reflection. Like we are
right.
called that. Like marriage is a ministry. It's a sacrament. It's a vocation.
Mm,
And so if you
hmm.
treat it like that, then it will bless you continuously.
Right. Right.
And the closer that a husband and wife are as individuals, the closer they are to God, the closer then they are to each other.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so
hmm.
it's definitely been, and NFP has been a big part of that
Mm,
because, I mean, you know, sex is an important part of being married because it's the ultimate expression of love. And so
right.
if you respect the way that it's intended, then you feel the
Hmm.
greatest extent of that love.
But on my
Sure.
end, the most challenging aspect of NFP was letting go of my fear of
Mm,
having more kids, and
mm,
letting God be in control. Right.
okay.
And so I
Yeah.
shifted from being like just adamantly against more kids to being, hey, you know what? It's not the most convenient time right now. But if we're,
Hmm.
following the system and God blesses us with more
Hmm.
kids, then obviously that was God's will,
Yeah.
and that's
Right.
what we're doing, right? So my mindset and my heart toward having more
Hmm.
children has completely shifted.
Hmm. Thank you so much for being on the Peak Day podcast, Nicole and Raleigh. It was lovely to hear your story and how you guys are just obviously bursting at the seams, just ready to share your gift of faith with other people. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Yeah,
having
thanks,
us.
Martha, for having us here.